Okay. So for this session, I had a couple questions over the summer, or really the end of the last school year. People asking different questions like, how are we going to, kind of get to know our students if we have some kind of blended model or virtual model, or if students choose to learn from home, something like that. And another question that I got was about screen time for students and how can we um, kind of give them the option for some offline activities so they're not sitting in front of an iPad or a computer screen for 8 hours. Both of them were very valid questions, and I'll be honest, it's something that teachers across the U.S. are still trying to figure out. Um, so I have some ideas that I'm going to share here. I would ask if anybody has ideas of their own or suggestions, just shout them out because at this point, no suggestion is really a bad one because everybody's trying to scramble and figure out how we can do these two things. So I thought that I would combine them here in a training, even though they don't necessarily go together any other way. And we know as teachers that building a positive relationship with our students can really improve academic results too. If we have that rapport with them, they tend to try harder, they tend to work harder in the classroom. And I would say that that's probably one of the things that we do really well here at Central Catholic is that relationship and that rapport that we build with our students. Um, I would say that last year we were probably kind of fortunate to have 3/4 of a year with the students in front of us. So we had a really good chance to get to know them. We knew who the hard workers were. You know, we knew them pretty well when we went out in the spring. But in the fall, that's going to be a little bit of a different challenge because most of us are going to have an entirely new group of students in front of us that we're not really going to know, and they're not really going to know us, other than maybe by reputation. Um, so that's kind of one of our challenges. So what I did was start to put together some ideas of some things that we already do or some things that we might be able to modify to try to include students in the classes if they're learning virtually from home. So just this is going to be kind of a brainstorming idea sharing session. Some of these things may apply, some of them maybe not so much, or maybe you can adapt and modify. So one of the first things that I was thinking of was how do we communicate with students online? Um, some of the feedback I got from teachers and from students was these Zoom sessions were not the same as a conversation. Or when you're teaching in class and you're having a class discussion, it's far from the same because students are, or maybe not comfortable with the webcam, seeing themselves, uh, sharing out loud to everybody else, whatever it might be. It wasn't really conducive to a discussion. So I think over time, students, teachers, everybody's going to get more comfortable. I'll be honest, I'm getting a lot more comfortable using this stuff after doing this so many times over the summer and over the course of the spring. So I think that that's going to be part of it. Um, but beyond that, too, just structuring those discussions, especially if you're going to have a whole class discussion or even a large group discussion online, um, things like setting goals. A lot of times these conversations can feel kind of fast paced or overwhelming when you're looking at a computer screen like this. Um, sometimes those conversations can get off track too. So to kind of have goals for those conversations that you're having or for those discussions, what it is that you're focused on for the day can kind of help the students stay focused. So one thing I thought of for this was just to have a simple slideshow. Even if you're having a discussion based class, just somewhere where you can post that question, like how I'm sharing the slide right now, and just have that question posed. So it's kind of like always there, available and accessible. Because as those discussions kind of take off, sometimes you can lose track of what the initial question was. So that would be just one way to kind of set those goals, to kind of post them there and share the screen that way. And establishing norms kind of goes along with that. So this would be like the groundwork for how those conversations would go, how they would progress. And this goes with our typical classroom setup. So, you know, what are those guidelines going to be for students who are participating in Zoom? Are they going to click the little raise hand button if they want to participate? Are they going to type a question in the chat? Those are the things that we'll need to determine will work for our classroom, and then share those things with students. And that might be, the first slide that you share, just those reminders for Zoom, how to unmute yourself or something like that if you want, or if you as the teacher are going to control it, what that process is going to look like. Raise your hand if you want to say something and I'll unmute you, something like that. And then as far as managing this discussion goes, kind of keeping track of what those goals are for the discussion, and being able to kind of redirect and go back to those main goals. But then the idea of reflection comes up too. So, as a whole group, sometimes you have this discussion that goes on. You might not hear from every student. So having students, giving them the opportunity to reflect in some way. It might be journaling, digitally in a blog. A vlog is just a video version of that, where students might make a short video clip talking about, a follow-up, a reflection on that discussion, even just a short response paragraph, or muddiest point paper, something that still confuses them. Just some way where maybe they didn't get a chance to participate in the discussion, or maybe they thought about it after the fact and were able to talk about it or think through it a little bit more, to give them that outlet. So, these are all things that for the students, as they get to know us, as they get to feel comfortable in the classroom, that idea of building relationships and, actually going through and reading and responding, giving feedback to those reflections, those papers, those journals, whatever it might be, even though you might not be having a live one-on-one conversation with them, that might be a way for them to kind of feel like you are responding to something that they wrote. So that feedback piece, I think, is going to be a little bit more important for that group of students who might be online. Any questions or comments with as far as that stuff goes? Ideas or anything like that? As far as communication goes, emails and things like that are going to be probably pretty common, just as they were in the spring. And some of these were just things that I found online, different ideas. So for the students who are choosing to learn from home from the beginning, if you find out that somebody's in your class, I like the idea of a postcard. Seems kind of simple and something that you could pull their mailing address out of Sapphire pretty easily once you can see your classes and your class pages. Especially for the 9th graders, I thought that might be nice. Just like a little note, kind of personalized to them. Obviously when you teach 150 different students, that might not be something that you can do for every single student. But if you have maybe 5 or 6 that are choosing to learn from home, that might help ease that anxiety for coming to a new school and learning in an entirely different way. As far as weekly emails and newsletters go, that was another idea. Not something that I ever really did before. I always thought that kind of stuff was a little bit more elementary, the elementary school idea. But in terms of like kind of keeping everybody on track and on the same pace, with a mix of students who might be at home and in school, it might not be a bad idea if you have those email groups. It might be something that's fairly easy to do. It might be kind of like a standard email template. I wouldn't go too crazy with newsletters and, fancy Word documents and formatting and stuff like that. If you want to, go for it. But even just a kind of a weekly email and say to all the students, hey, this is the goal for what we're going to do in the upcoming week. Lesson plans are on Sapphire. Make sure you check those and keep up to date. Any questions? Here's my office hours. Just that kind of weekly check-in might be something. And even to kind of communicate with the parents as well. They're going to be our biggest ally in a lot of this. And if you think about the typical high school student and you ask, what'd you do in school today? Nothing. That's usually the answer. So I think that's going to be something important too with the online school. Okay, you just sat in front of an iPad screen for 8 hours and you're telling me you did nothing all day. that might be something that you can kind of extend to the parents too, um, just to kind of give them an idea and get them on board. We talked a lot about office hours. We did the virtual office hours as well in the spring, and are going to continue that. But then the idea of conferences too. Um, and this doesn't have to be a weekly thing, maybe just quarterly for those students who are learning from home, just kind of having a check-in with them and actually scheduling that time. So rather than the email back and forth of, oh, I'd like to try to get a hold of you to meet with you, or Zoom, whatever it is, telling them, you know, during my office hours, whatever it is, like you set that time aside, um, where they should be available or could be available, and say, I'd like to meet with you for 30 minutes just to kind of check in, make sure they don't have any questions or anything like that. Was another idea that I thought was a nice one. Okay. All right, so that's all stuff above and beyond. Now, as far as the typical classroom goes, during formal instruction, right? This is the part where we show our true colors. This is the part where students really get to know us, is day to day in the classroom. And obviously that's going to feel a little bit different for students who are Zooming in from home. So one thing, the idea of online instructional games, that idea of team building, having students kind of feel like they are part of the class. Maybe they're working collaboratively with students who are physically in the building, working on the same document, something live on Google Docs or Google Sheets or Google Slides would be a good way to do that. But then there's some instructional games too. Bamboozle is a site that has some instructional, some maybe not so instructional games. But almost all of these have a team building feature. Kahoot, maybe not so much, but is something that students could participate in from home as well as in the building. Quizzes and Quizlet Live both have team building games. So they're, review games. You would preload the questions and the students would kind of work together to answer those questions. There's a couple other ones that are out there, what I'll talk about in a second, but that idea of team building and making them feel included. Virtual field trips was another one, depending on depending on the content, what you're trying to cover. There's a couple links to sites like Discovery Ed and virtual field trips, which we can show a little bit later. That would be the idea where the students can't physically go to a location, but there's a lot of things that teachers have already created. These have been around for maybe 5 or so years, and students could go and explore these places. They usually have extra information in them, right there on the screen on their iPad. So that's something that you could lead, that the students at home, at school, would both be doing the same thing. Showcasing student work. That was one that I've seen Tony Clifford do, even just in his class, pull up the students' English paper and go through it, explain why it was good, why it was an exemplar piece, something like that. Being able to do that and show a student who was working from home would be another way. But even just for the student from home to see what's going on in the classroom through a shared screen in Zoom or something like that might help too. Polling tools and discussion boards over the summer. Most people on this call have been with me. For other ones, I've talked about things like Mentimeter and Poll Everywhere, discussion boards in Google Classroom or in Sapphire, giving the students an opportunity to voice their opinion, respond to questions, even though they might not be physically in the classroom, that we have their voices heard. And then probably one of my favorite ideas that I found a couple of weeks ago was this idea of opening class with a soft start. And this was really intended for classes that are live online classes. But this is, rather than starting the lecture, let's say your class starts at 9 a.m., rather than starting at 9 a.m. on the dot, and a student might have trouble logging in, they might be a minute or two late and they miss out, giving the students like a minute or two just to settle in and kind of mentally transition from the class they were previously to this class. Because remember, they're not walking down the hall for 4 to 7 minutes from one class to another. They're clicking a link and jumping into the next class. So kind of giving them an opportunity to, play a review game, maybe provide like a math challenge question or like a brain teaser style question, trivia questions or something kind of silly, something, kind of trivial and easy that you could just display or something like that. Doesn't have to be though. It could be educational. It could be like a journal prompt, something for them to respond to, anything like that. Um, but that idea of just giving them a couple of minutes to transition into the new class, and really that gives you some time too to go in, make sure everybody's admitted to the class, make sure um, you can see everybody there, take your attendance, whatever you need to do, pull up your slideshow or whatever you're going to prepare for the day, and just kind of give you that transition time as well. So I like that idea a lot, so I thought I'd share that one.
I just
So John, I would agree. I mean, again, we should probably get Karen involved to clarify. But those kinds of things like the Kahoot review games or anything like that, I would categorize them as something that the students would be doing independently or collaboratively. So I wouldn't count that into that direct instruction time. And some of it is that whole debate over screen time, which has been a big deal for the last couple of years. And then again, when everybody went online, um, it kind of came out again. So, definitely the most efficient way to share resources with students is to put them online. The resources, I mean, whether the students are sitting in front of you or the students are at home, if you put them online in Google Classroom or in Sapphire or even in an email, it's so much easier for them to access them. You don't have to make copies and try to find a way to get them to students at home or anything like that. So I think the difference is really between active and passive screen time. So the idea of passive screen time, just sitting in front of a screen and watching, listening, and absorbing. All right. So Marcia, to your point, this is where video games would come into play. That idea of being kind of a passive, or sitting and watching Netflix or sitting and watching YouTube, which so many of our students do. And to a degree, watching a lecture would kind of fall into that idea of a passive screen time where you're sitting and watching.
Right, which is what a lot of our kids are doing anyway when they're in the classroom, and that direct instruction in the classroom, it's sort of passive when you're talking and they're listening. So
right. And then on the other side of that would be the active screen time where they're actually doing something. So, whether it's Kahoot or if they're working on Google Docs or in Google Sheets, or even, John, it could be offline, even if they're just working out a physics problem on paper with a pen in front of them in that time limit. If you teach for 5 and give them 5 to work or whatever it is, there's a difference there between that active and passive. And I think that's probably what we were striving for more with that 20 to 25 minute direct instruction idea. So yeah, we'll definitely clarify that with Karen. In terms of offline activities, I was hard pressed for finding things related to remote learning, and with everything that was going on, like I said, the easiest way to share things with students was online. As far as the offline activities went in,
so what happened today?
the ideas that were out there were related to like parenting and keeping the kids busy while they were at school, and they all kind of fell into these categories of make, explore, read, exercise, like physically exercise, or serve and do service work. I was thinking, when trying to plan for offline activities, things that students aren't necessarily doing in front of a computer screen, things that would kind of fall into those categories, where students are, a little bit more active, hands-on, things like that. Journaling and reading, drawing, sketching, even note taking. Like if they're watching you on Zoom and taking notes with paper and pencil isn't a bad thing either. The concept of choice boards is one that is a little bit more popular lately, and there tend to be a little bit more on the elementary side, but the idea that you come up with 9 activities, or you can make this 4 or whatever, different activities that you want the students to do either independently or collaboratively, and you say, all right, everybody start here in the middle one. I want that from every person, and then pick one or two others that you want to complete. So you give them a little bit of choice, or something like that. And for as far as these choices go, some of those might be online, some of those might be offline. But again, that's tough because now you have to think of 4 or 9 or however many different things. So like I said, those tend to be a little bit more elementary. But even just combining, that low tech and high tech. So if you were asking the students to create a video, have them storyboard the video on paper, kind of sketch it out. What's the order of the scenes going to be, or something like that, and then go and do the high tech side, creating the video. So I think that would be another way to think about it too, is just kind of breaking up those activities into, maybe a low tech piece that they do and a high tech piece. Again, this in terms of our reopening plan is not a requirement, but I did have some teachers ask the question and express some concern about, they didn't want the students to be doing everything on their iPad all the time if they didn't have to. And some of that is going to be dictated by your curriculum too. John, I know with physics, there's a lot of material to cover. So, some of those things, the labs, the simulations, those are going to be things that will work well online. Something like environmental science, that might be a place where students can kind of go out in the backyard and do something, maybe, depending on how it fits into the curriculum. So I think some of it will be dictated by the curriculum itself. Even the reading part of that is tough. We're trying to put things online so that all the students have access to the same things, but maybe actually reading a book, or having the students, if they give them the option, if they want to print it out at home and read it on paper, they can. So anybody have ideas, comments, or suggestions for this one? Because like I said, I was kind of hard pressed to find
Brian,
things.
can we have them do something on paper and then take a picture of it to hand it in, so that especially I know some of the kids that have learning disabilities, they're not always comfortable with that. They want to do something on paper first as opposed to that. So I mean, this would work well for that, is what you're saying, that we could do it that way without here's my paper, all germified and everything.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as long as you're okay with that. I did just find out that Notability has a document scanning feature now. So students could actually open up Notability, and where the little button is on the right, like when they're in a note and they can add something, like they can add an image. If they tap that, there's an option for a document scan. And what it does is access the camera, and the students just kind of hold the iPad over the paper, and it'll scan it into the note. And then that way, at least it'll be a PDF. So you don't have to worry about trying to get all these image files and open images and stuff like that. At least it'll be a PDF.
Yeah, because I know, like I said, some of them won't open for Sapphire and things like that. It's not compatible and it won't open. So, I wouldn't have them turn it in that way. I'm going to probably do it with just turn it in. But, there are some times where one kid will do it one way and one kid will do it another, and then you just can't open it. So,
yeah. And then Scannable is another app that teachers and students have access to. And it does the same thing. They hold the iPad over the page, and it scans it and saves it as a PDF, rather than taking a picture and having a picture file. So yeah, I think as long as you're okay with that and being able to read their handwriting, I think
that's
that would
another
be
issue entirely, but we won't go into that.
And I'm not trying to say, like, we've done things offline. We've taught offline for decades, generations. Not to say that we can't do that again. It's just that idea of access is now different. When you have students in front of you, it's easy to hand out materials and have them do things in front of you. But when students are at home, whether it's just a couple or whether it's all of them, that access is different. And that tends to be the challenge. Like, I used to have a lot of hands-on things that I did with social studies, and I had all the materials in class. not to mention now the whole germ factor that I didn't even think about. But just to say like, okay, you need a brown paper bag, these color crayons, whatever it was that I did with remember they were young middle school students. Those kinds of things, you can't guarantee that they have those at home. So that becomes a challenge. And with COVID, the unpredictability of things, we can't guarantee that they'll be able to go to the store anytime soon to pick up what they need. So when I was saying that I had a challenge trying to find ideas and things like that, that's kind of where that challenge came from.
Well, I'm grappling with that right now too, because I do have a lot of hands-on things and manipulatives, and I have to change how I do that, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm struggling with right now.
Yep. I know it's a challenge. So, but that was all I had. Like I said, these were two kind of shorter topics, and I was just, everybody in the field of education right now is kind of brainstorming these two topics, and as ideas come out, I'm trying to keep an eye on, what would work for us, what would help us out. But for now, like I said, it is a bit of a challenge. So, anybody comments, questions, thoughts, concerns, anything?
Brian, are you gonna have that choice board thing on here, or a cheat sheet or something that we could go back and look at
Yeah,
that?
so I'll put this slideshow up, and then everything that has links, anything that's in green. So
Okay.
all these Quizlets, Kahoots, those have been linked before, but you can click those, and then Discovery Ed and virtual field trips. You can. Oops, that's not good. I gotta fix that link. Yeah, you can just go and see what's there. So yeah, I'll share that out.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.